Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well on this stupendous Saturday. You're looking absolutely amazing, I must add, and I hope you have an amazing weekend. I'm going to get straight into the meat and potatoes as it's Coburger. It's Coburger we're talking about, and Stephen Hippler, Freudian slip. There's two things, because one thing seems that Hippler has gone against the agreement, the arrangement, the plea deal that set in stone certain things that Coburg would have to pay, and it seems that the goalposts are slightly being moved as he has now ordered Brian Coburg to pay for the urns for the ashes of Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogen. Now, I know some people, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, because there's something that we have to acknowledge and explain why I'm taking the stance that I'm taking with this, okay? And that is this, right? So you don't have to put your ashes or the ashes of your loved ones into urns to be displayed. Now, there was 4 urns that were purchased as well, because both of these two families wanted to split the ashes of the two girls, so they had one of each girl, not mixed but separate. So they've got an urn that contains some of Kaylee's, some that contains some of Maddie's, and both of the families have that set up. So they've got 4 urns. So that was a personal decision for them to display the remains of their lost loved ones in this fashion. And Brian Coburg's got to cop the bill for it. Now, some people out there will be in the realms of, well, he killed their family members, so he should have to pay everything that they should literally strip him of every single thing that they have. And you think to yourself, okay, I can see where you're coming from. I can see why some people will say that and think that that's justifiable. And everybody will, how can I say, I suppose anybody with a heart who truly believes Brian Coburg is guilty will go down that stance. The flip side of that coin is that's not the reality of how the world operates. We have seen countless people lose countless loved ones to countless murderers, and never, ever, 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 ever have I seen a situation quite so bizarre of that of the Idaho 4 case. Because I think, in reality, if Brian Coburg was guilty of this crime and the prosecution had everything that they needed in order to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, then the victims' families would have had the ultimate answer to all that in the execution of the accused, because the state of Idaho offers the death penalty, and this crime ticked every single box and some. So the fact that they pulled out of the execution, if you like, and going down that route proves that they didn't have enough evidence to convict the guy. Or you could go as far as to say, or they were aware that the evidence that they had, there was something not right with it. And I've always said this, with respect of the Idaho 4 case, it's not so much about what's done, it's about how it's done. You want a judicial system that operates correctly, right, and proper. And when it operates right and proper, within the constraints of the law, it operates in a way that then gets you answers. And this then becomes, like the Idaho 4, it's do the ways justify the means. Does that make sense? We know he did it, but we couldn't do things right in order to prove it, so we bent the rules, broke the rules, smashed the rules to pieces, but we got the right answer. It's whether you feel comfortable allowing these powerful entities to do these things in order to get and justify a conclusion to a case. And we also can't forget that even in Idaho alone, there has been cases where people have admitted to doing heinous crimes and losing decades of their life, only for it decades down the line to be proven that this person didn't do this crime. They were just pleading guilty to avoid execution. Chris Tapp, is it? For one. You know, there's multiple ones. We've covered them over the 3 years that we've been covering the Idaho 4 case. We've talked about the multiple cases. But ultimately, Brian Coburg pled guilty to this crime. And in the aftermath of him pleading guilty to this crime, there was an expectation that the docs would then come out and they would fill in the blanks. They would tell us everything that we needed to know. Like all of the guilters would say, oh, you wait till trial, all of this evidence is going to come out and it's going to show you that Brian Koberger was the person who did it. Well, we're still sitting here months after he even pled guilty to the crime, and straight away after he pled guilty to the crime, we literally heard the lead prosecution. He came out and said that they didn't really had anything to connect Brian Koberger. You've then got specialists that kind of turn around and say this was an odd crime because there doesn't seem to be any build-up to what was happening in this case. There's absolutely no connection whatsoever, and it would appear that Brian Koberger literally picked this house randomly just before he would enter it and do the crime. And the behaviour of the car would also suggest that this white car that they're saying is Brian Koberger's car, it didn't seem to know where it was going. It was almost like it was a DoorDash delivery driver that couldn't quite find the house that it was going to. Not the behaviour of a car that had been stalking a property, knew exactly where they were going and how they were going to do this crime. Even down to the knife sheath being left doesn't quite make sense when you consider that Brian Koberger is a criminology student who apparently wears gloves to do everything, even wearing gloves when he is dealing with rubbish and bins, but yet he doesn't wear gloves when he's handling the very knife sheath that he plans to walk into this house that he is going to execute the people within it, and he's not even going to attach this knife sheath to him. He's literally going to handhold it and then place it down during this crime. And it's all a bit weird. But let's just have a quick look at this. So dual share. Judge orders Brian Koberger to pay restitution to parents of 2 victims for urns. An Idaho judge has ordered Brian Koberger to pay restitution to the parents of 2 of his victims for their urns. Like, you could argue and say, right, so what happens with the other families? Do they get any further money? Because these 2 families seem to be getting more money, and they'd already earned more money than the other families via GoFundMes, to the tune of literally hundreds of thousands of pounds. They have one of the families has a monetized Facebook account where they are charging people to follow their page. You don't have to; it is an option, it is a choice. But there's over 100,000 people on there, and some of them are paying. And we only have access to certain amounts of money, like the GoFundMe, in order to track how much money these people have received, because they were literally taking in gifts and definitely money from other sources such as PayPal and other cash apps, and likely posted straight direct to them. So there is we simply do not know the amount of money that these families have made off of the deaths of their children, which again is bewildering to me when you look at the countless cases that are out there. That you have to understand that yes, there was 4 people killed in one crime. This is a mass murder. But each family lost a child. So that is one family loses one child. And I say that because I'm trying to compartmentalize things here and say what makes, for instance, the Gonsalves family losing Kaylee Gonsalves any different than another family losing their child to murder. What makes their situation so special and different that it warrants what we're seeing? You know, Dylan Mortensen, someone who was in the house at the time of the crime, was proven to have... Hold on, I'll stick a pin there and come back. So it says Koberger will have to pay $1,420 to the Gonsalves parents, Steve and Christy Gonsalves, and $1,587 to Mogan's mother, Karen Laramie. Both judgments carry an interest rate of 9.125 per year. Now, we will go and have a look, because there is a caveat to this, but I wonder whether this is, again, to try and get more money out of Brian for the families. But Dylan Mortensen, she's proven to be in this house at the time of this crime. Without a doubt, they would have heard what was going on. I can't for the life of me understand how they wouldn't have heard a mass murder situation in a house that seemingly was made of cardboard. They literally move out of a room, between rooms, and see one of the victims laying on the floor. They do nothing about it. They go into court and put on some waterworks, and them themselves earn over $100,000 out of it. And I know what people are going to say, but you talk about the Idaho 4 case and you are earning money, so that's a little bit hypocritical. I'm a content creator. I'm a content creator who creates content. Do you know what I mean? I understand the viewpoint of some people. Of course they will. And that'll be the people who don't agree with what I say, saying, yeah, but you're earning money. But what I'm trying to get at is this is an unusual situation. In what world would you suggest that it seems right and proper for someone who saw one of the victims laying on the floor and did nothing about it, left it and didn't even try to reach out for help for 8 hours, why would they be then paid over $100,000? And then you've got the other one who was in the house, Bethany Funk. Well, she didn't get $100,000. She didn't turn up at the court to offer solidarity to her friend who she shared this moment with. Instead, sent someone else in with a letter, like she's trying to avoid the place. And it just so happens that she was someone who potentially had exculpatory evidence for Kohberger. And all of a sudden that gets fucking disappears into the ether. But I can't get my head around the weirdness of this case. You've got Stephen Hippler here, who's clearly gone against the plea deal, gone against the arrangement, the agreement, because in no way should Brian Kohberger be paying for urns, man. Do you know what I mean? What if they turn around and say, well, now we want to put these urns on a plaque and have like a special light rig up? You know, well, perhaps put them on a table and have some things. Are they then going to go back to the court and Brian Kohberger's going to pay for that to be done? Or are we done with the urns? Is it because the 4 urns that you want to get and split across them all? I don't get it. I genuinely don't get it. And is that what we're going to see now in other cases? Other cases where you can literally just monetize the death of your family to the levels that we're seeing here and beyond, and even when there's court agreements set in place and plea deals, if you decide to get certain things in the aftermath of that, then they can cop the bill for it. Now, we need to finish on this because it is saying that Idaho killer Brian Kohberger given green light to sell story for cash he's forced to pay victims' families. And it says here, Brian Kohberger has been ordered to pay the restitution to his victims' families. The convicted killer has tried to avoid the obligation, arguing for his lawyers that he had no money. However, Judge Stephen Hippler has now ruled that Brian Kohberger has no excuse not to comply, as he has received donations and continues to do so. And it says, Judge suggests Brian Kohberger sell his story for money, claims the killer is still receiving donations. Prosecutors in the Brian Kohberger case have scored a legal victory that compels Kohberger to pay restitution to his victims' families. The convicted murderer is currently serving 4 life sentences for the murders of the University of Idaho students Kayla Gonsalves, Madison Mogans, Anna Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. The sentencing, which occurred months ago, also included restitution fines reportedly totaling over $350,000. The vast majority of that going to the state. While Kohberger's attorneys had earlier argued he has no money to pay, Judge Stephen Hippler's ruling on Thursday ordered that the former PhD student must comply because he receives donations, and more may come in the future. According to a report, the judge also pointed out that Kohberger can earn money through work in prison, which many inmates do. To further ensure that the killer meets the requirement, Hippler pointed out that the 30-year-old could attempt to monetize his story to any interested parties for a book or movie deal. There you go. So it says, in a hearing earlier this month, Hippler revealed that Koberger's commissary was far from empty. While he didn't disclose the exact amount, he said that the convicted criminal had received 5 figures in donations since his incarceration. At the time, Koberger's lawyer, Eliza Massath, had tried to downplay the funds, saying that much of the money came from Koberger's family. She also claimed they did so to maintain communication with their son and brother while he was incarcerated. However, the total amount appears to be significantly higher than what inmates typically need for phone calls, which may have influenced the judge's decision to rule against Koberger. Massath also stated at the time that it was merely speculation that Koberger had any intention of cobbling together a deal for his story. But with the recent ruling, Koberger may possibly consider doing so, although this is yet to be confirmed by his attorney. It would be interesting to see what that story entails and if he does indeed. Because what I will say this. The reason why my stance is as it is at the moment and not happy about the going against the deal, and I still would be unhappy against the judge who clearly works on the side of the prosecution, making stupid suggestions like this, like paying for fucking urns. But what I will say is, if Brian Koberger is guilty of this crime, then I feel that he should be restricted in what he can earn in terms of there's money to pay to families that's in the plea agreement that he agreed to pay, and he should have to pay that. And if he then earns money himself through selling his story, then the money that he has agreed to pay, he should pay out of that. I do agree with that. The issue is, and why the stance is that I take now, is because I am yet to be proven that Brian Koberger is guilty of this crime. And I can't sit here and say that the fact that he says that he did it is enough for me to 100% be certain that he did. And with that small proportion of doubt, however small it is, that is enough, because that is not beyond a reasonable doubt. I feel that there is still reasonable doubt in this case. And case in point, like I said earlier, there has been multiple cases where people have pled guilty to crimes that they haven't committed. And maybe if Brian Koberger does now go down the route of selling his story, that will be the conclusion that we needed to prove that he did it beyond a reasonable doubt. Let me know down below where you are with it, what you think about it, what you think about all this that's happening. Is this just become a bit of a piss take with respect of how much money certain people are trying to drag out of this case to the tune of literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars? Let me know. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I shall catch you all in the next one. Mwah.